evening. Thank you for coming out. I realise that this is eating into the 20 days of Christmas drinking that are remaining before the big day. So it's good to see so many people here. As you've seen from my talk, Broadcasting in IP World, I'm going to talk about technology and technology blurring into radio, how the two work really well side by side, and why I am very excited to work in that space and kind of the work that I do. When I mentioned I'm going to talk about radio specifically, usually a couple of things come to mind, things people think about straight away, and I've used this slide before, but I'm quite happy now that I can actually update it and include that as well. And depending on how people react, you can quickly work out how many people have kids. So this is Hey Dougie, which is on Children's BBC. Recently did a program all about radio, which was quite unusual because on the face of it was a normal kids TV program, but you could quickly see under the surface it was very much about how pirate radio had affected the BBC in the 60s. So the writers must have had a lot of kind of prior knowledge about that. But yeah, I'm basically to talk about why I get excited about radio and technology and everything as well. So I usually start with this slide, which I know everyone loves graphs, and it's a perfect way to kick off a happening Thursday night. But these graphs are produced by Radioplayer. Radioplayer are the appointed organisation for doing the statistics for radio listening. So they go out and they do a survey 4 times a year. They send diaries out to people and ask them to record their radio listening over 7 days. These get compiled into the statistics that the radio stations use. And they also do this study called MIDAS, which is the measurement of internet-delivered audio services. So as well as doing a traditional thing that just works out who listens to which radio station and for how long, they also try and look at how that is a kind of share of a person's listening. So what are the things they might be listening to? The labels are a bit small on here, but the graph on the left is literally showing you the percentage of all adults within a week that radio reaches, and the massive bar right at the end is 93% of adults that will listen to radio for at least 15 minutes at some point during a week. And then the one on the right is showing that how all their listening is shared. So the big part of the graph is the 73%, which again is for live radio. And then you can see the other things that are making that up are things like digital tracks, on-demand music, so things like Spotify, podcasts, etc. So radio is a huge part of many people's lives. And the reason I am so passionate about radio and find it so amazing is the fact that if you ever get into an environment where you're producing radio content and you're talking to people really do engage with it, particularly people who might be lonely or they're bored at work. They will latch onto it, and if you ask for interaction, you get people coming back to you and talking to you about it. A lot of people will talk about their favourite presenters or their favourite shows. It really does build up a connection. And the other thing that's quite powerful about it is the fact that it's a medium you can consume while you're doing other things. So people have it on the office, they have it while they're driving, washing up. It's unlike a lot of other mediums. You can't do that reading a newspaper very easily. You can't do that with watching TV, etc. So I really love not just the message, because people can have arguments about I don't like commercial radio, I don't like this specific show, but as much the medium and the way it just connects to people. And a big part of that as well, and the way I kind of got into radio was initially through being a presenter and a producer at a radio station, was learning that craft of putting audio together and how, depending on the way you say something or you do something, you can really elicit a response out of people. And through that and through kind of doing bedroom FM and all those kind of things, eventually got into a real commercial radio station and started working in Manchester in the early 2000s. And alongside the time I was kind of doing that, separately my other passion, my other interest was technology. And I started at university in Manchester on a computer science course. I had gone through the late 80s, early 90s kind of initiation ceremony. I had a Spectrum, had an Amiga, onto a PC. And so whilst I was studying for my computer science degree in Manchester, I was also working at the radio station and probably, truth be told, spending more time at the radio station than I should have been concentrating on the degree, but did successfully complete the degree and went on to work at the radio station that I'd been based at. And that station was Key, which was the local radio station in Manchester, looking after their website and working on various technical bits and pieces for the radio station. And I'll let you into a secret about if you talk to someone from the radio industry, you can quickly work out how long they've worked in the industry. A bit like if you look at the cross-section of a tree and you count the rings, you ask them the first station they worked at, and then you trace the number of times that station has changed names since. So I worked at Key when it was owned by a company called EMAP. EMAP became Power. They then changed the station to Hits Radio. So you've got like 4 things, so a while. Similarly, once I moved on from EMAP and from Key to come to Bristol, that's how I ended up in Bristol to work for a company called GCAP, since become global, so that adds more rings to my tree and older still. And at Global, I worked in the Creative Technology team, so we were responsible for finding new ways for people to listen to the radio and how we could improve that experience on new technologies and new platforms. So not just being heavily wedded to radio will be the same and work the same way, working with these new things that were coming out and working out how radio could be made better. And then over the last couple of years, the big I'll use the phrase big tech effectively to talk about Spotify, Facebook, Google. Big tech has realized that audio is really powerful. So video can be expensive and it's hard to get people's attention. It's interesting the way Facebook will kind of fiddle statistics to say people watch something when they saw it for a fraction of a second while they're scrolling through a list. But audio, as I said, can be listened to whilst doing other things. And podcasting it's kind of had its second wave of interest, and it's grown again. And Spotify have latched onto that and they're really excited about it. Smart speakers have come out, and the number one thing people do on their smart speakers after asking it to time an egg is play the radio, play a podcast. And we've even got kind of new entrants like Anchor, they bill themselves as being an easy way to produce podcasts, but really what they're doing is just providing an easy way for people to record messages and share them. So it's almost a bit like Twitter for audio. So big tech's here, and effectively for someone who's come from a more traditional radio experience, it kind of feels like the tank's been parked on the lawn of how we can kind of either work with them, or if we can't work with them, counteract what they're doing and kind of show them how certain things should be done. And it sounds like I've got a chip on my shoulder about that, but it's more about the fact that some of the things that they have done recently with experiments have shown a slight lack of understanding about how some things in audio and radio work. So Google have recently talked about the fact that when you ask it for a daily briefing on your home speaker, they're going to learn from your search history the things you're interested in, and then take various different audio reports you can find around the internet, chop them up, and build a new news report for you. And the early press previews that have been done of it have said it's clever in terms of the content it can get, but it's not clever in terms of the way it's presented. So the actual listening experience to one of these pre-compiled audio reports is a bit all over the place. Intonation doesn't match. Someone will sound really excited and then all of a sudden it drops to a totally different voice and they're talking about a different topic and they've not been brought in at the right point. So it's interesting to see where they're going. It's great that they're in this space and they're innovating, but there's still a lot that can be learnt from the way that more traditional radio experiences and audio experiences are being put together, and it's kind of meeting in the middle somewhere. So we're coming from the traditional angle, they're coming from the technology angle. How can we find that common ground of what would be a really great experience? And so, as I say, I'm not you're doing it all wrong, but I'm passionate about audio being an amazing experience for everyone and how we can use technology to deliver that in a really cool and an innovative way. So how have I tried to achieve that so far? So I'll run through a couple of projects that I've recently worked on, both from my time at Global through to being working freelance for a few years, and just give you a kind of flavour of different projects I've worked on. When I started at Global, one of the big projects we worked on was building the first iPhone app for listening to radio, and this was prior to the App Store, so it's effectively a web application which worked around an interesting hack of presenting a continuous stream as if it was a static file and getting a kind of web browser to play it. We also did various things around getting radio to play on the Nintendo Wii console and how that would work. Experimented with ideas on here for things like showing you previous tracks that have played and how you might be able to buy those or find out more information on them. And the big thing that we worked on in this team was hybrid radio, which is what I'm going to come on to. So foreshadowing Klaxon, I'll talk about that more in a minute. From that, I also am one of the organisers organisers of Radio TechCon, which is an annual conference that's put together in London each November, which is all about presenting all the kind of things that I'm going to talk about, various different technology things in and around the radio and audio industry. I worked with a company called Curry Norden who do audience research for radio. This was a web application that we built that allows you to, basically stations put clips of their shows on, and as you're listening to them, these buttons light up and you say how much you like or dislike the thing you're hearing, and it asks you every 10 to 15 seconds, are you still enjoying it? And it allows them to draw these very interesting graphs that will play over time and show as interest kind of dwells or peaks based on the guest that's on air, the competition that they've got, the song they've played, etc. And I did a project for BBC R&D, which they love to produce these really fancy graphics, which don't necessarily mean a huge amount, but this was a project for getting radio into smartphones, so looking at ways that DAB and FM technology could be incorporated into smartphones, how you would get smartphone manufacturers interested in doing that. Again, hybrid radio is sneaking on there, so we'll talk about that in a minute. And a project I did for Radioplayer Car. So Radioplayer is an organisation that's made up of the commercial broadcasters and the BBC, all put money into a pot to produce a unified listening experience on the internet, so web consoles all looking the same and working the same way, and also experimenting with in-car radio listening and how in-car radio listening can be updated and modernised. And the project I worked on for them was a in-car adapter that added DAB to your car, but also worked with internet radio. And this is all based around the concept of hybrid radio as well. So, hybrid radio, what the main point I was going to come on talk about. I was part of the team that established RadioDNS, which is a not-for-profit organisation that promotes and develops hybrid radio back in 2008. And the main focus of RadioDNS is to develop technical standards on how hybrid radio should work. I'm also a system administrator for RadioDNS, and I sit in the technology group to continue to develop the technology as well. And the main focus of RadioDNS is working out how you can blend internet access and internet content with audio that's delivered over the radio, so over FM and over DAB. And the most common question you get when you present that to someone as a new concept is, isn't it all going IP? Why do we need broadcast radio? Why do we need FM or DAB? Is 5G going to be the saviour and everything will work over that instead? And aside from having to wear tinfoil hats to talk about 5G, it's an interesting point, but there are quite a few issues with IP delivery still, particularly for audio streaming. One of the biggest issues, certainly for commercial broadcasters, is the fact that if you put a transmitter up on a hill and start playing your radio station, your costs don't change once you've done that based on one person listening or 4 million people listening from that transmitter. With IP, obviously, your cost goes up for every single listener that tunes in and tunes out because your bandwidth usage is growing. The other problem you have with that as well is that the more money or less money you put into that means your server infrastructure might not cope with huge audiences. It's quite interesting this week seeing Amazon experimenting with getting Premiership football over an internet delivered platform, people having problems with it. They decided that to make that reliable in pubs, which is obviously a big environment for football, they would actually put it on satellite because it's a broadcast platform that doesn't have these risks associated with delivering it over the internet. And that's kind of one of the key issues you potentially have with IP is it's not always a reliable way of accessing the data, and it can have problems in mobile environments. The other big thing is that it often costs the listener at the point of consumption, so they're either paying for a broadband package or they're paying for a mobile data package. The more they stream, the more of that usage they have for it as well. And the other key benefit of broadcast is its position in emergency situations. So if a natural disaster goes through an area, it's quite common for it to wipe out in-the-ground broadband access, mobile cell towers. One of the things that communities often focus on getting working first is the FM and the AM transmitters so that they can broadcast to the people. And so we end up in a situation where we kind of want a balance of the two. Broadcast gives us a lot of benefits. It's great at delivering at a stable cost regardless of how many people are listening. internet is great at delivering additional targeted content that's on demand. You can customize it, you can personalize the content that comes in there as well. So the ideal scenario is to blend the two, and that's what RadioDNS hybrid radio is all about. Now, I know the talk after me is obviously a very kind of detailed technical talk, so I wasn't sure where to pitch this at, but just to very quickly explain, DNS, technology that powers the internet, everything on the internet has an IP address. People aren't very good at remembering IP addresses for everything, so you typically will put into your browser google.co.uk. DNS is a system that converts google.co.uk to an IP address. And then if you were running a lookup on a computer, this is typically what you'd see on a console if you tried to perform this DNS check manually that your browser does in the background. So you can ask it for an A record, you'd give it google.co.uk, it will give you an address back. And so we're harnessing this technology. It's an old technology that's been on the internet for a long time. It's proven, it's stable, it scales well. This is a great basis for a lookup system when you're trying to look up a broadcast radio station on the internet. And so when you're receiving radio into a typical radio transmitter, you may have noticed on a lot of FM radios in cars and things, they can often get the name of the radio station, which is digital information on an analog platform. The way this works is using a system called RDS, which is a way of transmitting a very small amount of binary data alongside FM radio. Similarly, DAB is an entirely kind of digital-based platform. Once it's received and decoded the signal, you've got a binary stream of data. Both of these systems provide lots of little identifying marks for each radio station, which are useful for building an identifier that you can then look up on the internet. So to give a quick example, these are the parameters for BBC Radio Bristol. On FM, in the RDS, we obviously get the frequency of the radio station that we're tuned into, 94.9. There's a thing called a PI code, which is a program identifier. So that's a number that's supposed to uniquely identify the station. And because that range, these 4 hexadecimal characters, can't possibly do all the world's radio stations, they combine it with an extended country code. So the idea is that the two together gives you an internationally unique number for the radio station. Similarly on DAB, DAB is kind of more complicated in the way that the stations are organised, but we have a very similar concept that there's a set of identifiers that combined uniquely identify this radio station. And then RadioDNS's job, deep inside the specifications, is to explain how you take those values and that information and build it back into an internet address for you to be able to look up. So these are the examples for FM and DAB. These are the values I was just talking about that you receive over the air that you drop in. And then you can perform this as a query if you want to play along at home later. That's the values that I was just showing before for BBC Radio Bristol, performing the lookup, and you can see that we now get a server address for the BBC. And then the idea of RadioDNS is it provides a framework that you can build applications on top of. Once we've connected the radio station to the internet, we've got a starting point that we can then go off and discover things that the radio can do with this radio station. So the specification goes on to explain how applications work. And the idea is that they all have predefined names. You can perform what's called an SRV record lookup, which is another type of DNS record. You drop the name of the application in, and the C name is the value we got previously, so this radiodns.api.bbc.co.uk. And this gives you back an SRV record, which is a type of record which has various different values on it. One of them is to do with weight, so you can actually return like 5 or 6 records, and it tells you how to order them so that they can be load balanced. Then we've got a port number and a host address again. So these applications, there's currently 3 applications that RadioDNS define and explain, but it's kind of, because it's all an open standard, anyone is welcome to build additional things beyond it. But the 3 that RadioDNS focus on are SPI, which stands for Service and Program Information. That's basically a metadata feed about the radio station and the programs it broadcasts. This allows you to build interfaces that do interesting things. So this is a phone that's got FM radio in it, and typically the ones you can see that have no logos on, that is the limit of the information you would get over the air. So RDS can tell us it's BBC R4. It's not very human friendly, and it's not BBC Radio 4, doesn't have a logo, etc. But you can see the 2 stations there, Classic and Heart, have got a logo. The name is correctly formatted. It's longer than the 8-character limit. That's because the XML file that you receive over the Radio SPI application describes all this information. It tells you what the station's called, tells you what kind of music it plays, it will give you a link to the logo. Crucially also, IP streaming URL for the station. So this means that when you're in an area with good reception, it can use the cheap or free to the user FM reception and play that normally. But if you walk out of the area or drive out of the area and you can no longer receive it on FM, it can flip automatically to an internet stream and carry on playing. So you can kind of get the best of both worlds. The broadcasters are happy that you keep listening. You're happy as a user. You didn't have to think about any of that decision making. You're not presented with, do you want to listen on FM, on DAB or on the internet? You just pick the station name that you know and recognise, and it kind of works it all out for you. And just to quickly show you how that kind of technology works under the hood, it's very similar to the previous example, that once we've done the SRV record lookup, we've got a host name and a port. We can then build this URL, which is using the host name, the port, and then it puts this path on the end, RadioDNS SPI 3.1 SI.xml, and then you get a very, very long XML document that gives you all this kind of information, and you can see there's a logo there, and it tells you who they are, etc. And that's Radio SPI. The second technology is slideshow. So the idea behind slideshow is that you can provide real-time images that change as the songs change, as the presenters change, tell you about what you're listening to on air. It's completely up to the broadcaster what they do with that. It can show you now playing information. If an advert plays, they could show you a visual that goes with the advert for the advertisers. The idea behind this technology is just really to take radio from being, if you look at a lot of car head units currently, if you tune to a radio station, you might literally just see a frequency on the screen and nothing else. And the idea behind this is that you can show rich colour visuals that give you more information and more context to what you're listening. This works over a socket-based protocol, so I've done a very rough example of how this might work using Telnet, but you essentially connect to the server on the port that you've been given. It uses a protocol called STOMP. You give it a connect frame, it replies to you've connected. You give it a subscribe frame and give it a topic. So this is a topic for any images to do with the DAB radio station for Radio Bristol. And then every so often you will get these messages coming back over the socket that give you a URL to link to, so you can make the slide clickable, and an image. It's intentionally quite basic in that it doesn't have a fancy markup or use HTML or anything, because this is a very low level, simple to implement for manufacturers. They just need to show a picture every so often and potentially make it interactive. This technology does also have a text topic as well, so you can use it to show kind of long text messages if you can't show a full visual as well. One of the other things that's in this technology as well, to make it work across lots of different devices, because car head units are getting more and more high resolution and more advanced. You can request a specific pixel density and a specific size, and you can see there the example. This is the default size that the technology works with if you don't give it any information. This is how big you could potentially make an image by changing the dimensions, and this allows it to work across a huge number of devices, from tiny kind of smartphones right up to huge displays. And then the final specification, which hasn't been fully standardized yet, but is something that's in the works as well, is tagging. And the idea behind this is basically, if you're listening to the radio but you're driving and you're hearing something that's of interest, you can hit a button to say, I'm interested in this, I want to find out more. And it allows you to then later go back, log onto a website through a user account and be able to see all those things you've tagged. So find that song that you like that's really interesting, or if an interview mentioned a website to go to, you'd be able to tag it and find that website later. And the idea behind this is really simple, that it basically defines a way of recording a timestamp against the radio station, send that to the broadcaster, and it's up to the broadcaster to be able to look up that timestamp, work out what it relates to, and provide more content for it. So there's two applications that are already in production and standardized. They are recognized international standards with ETSI, an important, well-recognized body, and they are in production. So the Audi A8 already has these features built into it. There's in some of the example screens from the car. This is showing how you can turn service following on and off. So as you drive around in your car, it will flip between DAB, FM, and the internet based on what your reception is. The one thing that Audi have done, which is really nice on it, is they've even worked very carefully to get the blending right. So it analyzes the waveform of what you're listening to on the different platforms, lines them up, so you literally can't hear this join as it switches between different platforms. It has to play around with delays and all sorts, because FM and DAB are usually quite far ahead of IP. Another thing that they've built is this unified presets. So the idea is that you can preset a radio station on any platform. So you could listen to it on DAB and hit it as a preset, and it will automatically work out what platform that's on at any point you hit it again in the future. And this is another thing which is quite a common kind of want for manufacturers and for users, which is a unified station list. So cars currently, a lot of them, if you go into radio, it'll immediately ask you, do you want AM, FM, DAB? Then you have to pick a station. This doesn't do that. It merges them all together because it can work out and deduplicate stations that are on multiple platforms. It can show the logo. It can give them a nice description and kind of work out what they are. So you can see that the whole focus about this is making radio a better experience for users, making it easier to use, making it a more enjoyable experience as well. And that's kind of what the bedrock of RadioDNS and hybrid radio standards is all about. The other thing that it's great for, and what I mentioned briefly earlier, is that because it is a platform, it allows people to build other things on top of it as well. So there's a project called H Radio, which has quite a number of contributors in. A few you probably recognise, like W3C, again, Radioplayer that I talked about earlier, some other public service broadcasters. They are looking at what RadioDNS offers and how they can build additional applications on top of it and what that user experience is like. So RadioDNS doesn't worry as much about what the end experience looks like in terms of defining that, whereas this is more looking at how they would define that and what it would look like and how it would work. Some of the interesting things they are doing is having it so that when you're listening to the radio station, it can discover podcasts and listen again content, so you can use the live radio streams as a jumping off point to go into more in-depth content. So there might be a short interview that you could tap a button and hear the full length interview delivered over the internet. Another thing they're looking at doing as well is different ways of delivering the radio station over the internet so that it can be blended seamlessly, a bit like Audi are doing between the different platforms as well. And this kind of leads on then to what is a big trend across all of radio, which is talking about personalization, and it's something that having this IP below broadcast is really good at. So a lot of IP-based radio streams have started playing around with doing things like ad insertion, which is where they will change your adverts out to be more specific to the profile of user they know that's listening. They're also doing it with things like promotions and music. Potentially, if they know that you don't like a certain song or a certain artist, they might be able to swap that out as well. And one of the things we're looking at doing is how we can bring that back to the broadcast platforms so that when they are in this environment that they can find out this additional information, they can potentially switch between the two. So you might have a radio that, although it can perfectly receive the radio station over FM or DAB, it might occasionally switch to IP purely just to get a slightly more personalised or unique experience for the listener. And it's really about blurring the lines so that the listener never has to think about what's going on, but it's delivering a much more interesting experience for them. And it kind of brings me towards my final points, which is that radio is becoming a multi-platform experience. It's not going to all shift over to IP. It's not going to all go over to DAB. It's certainly not all going to stay on FM. There are more devices coming in every day, like smart speakers, listening on your TV, podcasts. It's a huge mix of different stuff, but the kind of the core things that I get really excited about with radio equally apply to however it's distributed. It's about the kind of the medium rather than the way it's distributed. And so working on these technologies and pulling these things together and trying to simplify that experience for listeners is what gets me really excited and why I like working on all these different kind of technologies. And if it is going to become multi-platform, it is going to go into areas where radio is not fully in control of the listener experience. So example, the dashboard, it needs to punch above its weight. Radio needs to stand out and look as visually exciting and as engaging as Spotify or Pandora or any of the kind of other apps you might find on this platform. And with kind of big tech chomping at it and trying to push it aside, etc., that's what I'm really passionate about doing and hoping that it keeps radio vibrant for its next 100 years of listening. Thank you very much, and if anyone's got any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them. Yes?
So I had one question which you partly answered when you talked about the A8 synchronising the different streams.
Yeah.
Because it's very noticeable that digital tends to be behind analog.
Yeah.
and IP can be 30 to 30 seconds per minute behind.
Yeah.
Now, with the Amazon football, it's one I think people complain about. Behind.
Yeah, it's really far behind.
Do you see that as being a problem to the adoption of a lot of the IP technology? Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, so talking about the different delays, particularly on IP platforms away from analog distribution, and specifically about Amazon football, where the IP coverage, you got the notification that the goal had happened, or you heard it on the radio before you'd see it on the screen. It's an interesting challenge, and obviously IP needs to have these huge buffers, and particularly when you're trying to scale something out to people all over the world, you need to put this content into content delivery networks, which means there's a delay between you producing the content, getting it somewhere that more people can access, and then them accessing it. And it's something that some people care about passionately, and other people don't really seem to care about all that much. And it's the kind of, there are ways of fixing it, there are ways of doing it. The typical way of a lot of people dealing with it is kind of putting delays in place so that you delay the fastest method of transmission so that you can pull them all back into line. Some people feel uncomfortable about that when it's a live event, when it's football, that effectively you'd be locking the whole of the country out, so they only find the goal once the slowest platform had caught up with it. It's interesting. There are ways of dealing with it, but it very much depends on how much people care and how controversial it potentially is for the delay of that content as well. Yeah.
So you talked a lot about the sort of disadvantages of IP in terms of the movie method that's scale and as global as accessible oil. Is there an alternative on the horizon to moving audio by anything other than IP? Anything larger like that?
So you've essentially got the IP and then the broadcast platforms. So although DAB is from the late 80s now, it's still very much the kind of current technology that is seen as an alternative to it, because it's a digital platform. It's relatively cheap to develop it and go on to air with it. The problem you always have is that there's only so much spectrum available, only so many people can operate it. And so you end up with a kind of bidding war for people to get the spectrum in the space to be able to do it. But essentially, if you're not using an IP technology, then you would be using a broadcast technology, and there's not really anything beyond that yet in terms of how it might work differently.
So you were mentioning the kind of with the hybrid thing. I imagine that as a producer or an advertiser, being able to switch over to IP means you're able to more track what the audience is doing. Kind of roughly sell to producers and advertisers.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. So you're asking about the ability to track over IP compared to being on a broadcast platform. It's something that obviously commercial broadcasters are very interested in, and they do see that as a benefit. It's a necessary thing of the way that IP technology works, is that you can see that form of connection coming in. The thing they do like about it is, like you say, you can begin to work out a bit more about who the person is, and you can work out where they're connecting from, how many people are there, etc. So yeah, that they are seeing that as a benefit. It's something that RadioDNS doesn't specifically get involved in. It's just talking about kind of the options are there and they're available to you, and the ethics behind that then get a bit tricky.
How do people make money out of podcasts? I wonder. Is everything out there for free?
So it's not really specifically my area of knowledge, but a lot of people are using promotions and sponsorship and advertising actually in the audio content. The belief being that if you had to charge a podcast up front, no one would ever kind of dive in and start. You need that basis of people and then try and monetize once people are there, versus putting the paywall up straight away and expecting people to come in. So it's the same kind of model that commercial radio has been based on, commercial TV has been based on. Yeah, it's kind of where it is. And in the early days as well, there was no way of kind of locking that access out. It's only more recently people have started to talk about that. And there are people doing it now. So there are platforms that will charge you a monthly fee to get exclusive access to podcasts before anyone else. But it's kind of this long tail of, you're going to get a very small number of people who are willing to pay that money per month to get the episode. obviously a huge number of people that they can run advertising to. Yeah.
Obviously, a lot of people listen to radio in the car more than anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a sort of conflict of interest between traditional radio stations and big tech in terms of Apple and Google putting their technology into car headiness that might possibly stand in the way? Are they going to try and get their access solution in rather than the kind of open standard one? And how do you combat that?
Yeah, and that is the kind of big project that certainly organisations like Radioplayer are trying to focus on, because once you're going into their environment, in the way we've seen with phones, that Google and Apple will try and just do what they want to do, and it kind of everyone comes along. The benefit we still have in that arena at the moment is that the car manufacturer still kind of holds a significant pull on it. They can turn off Google Car and CarPlay if they want to, and they are having those awkward conversations at the moment with, well, we need a radio button, we need this Honda app, and we're also seeing a bit of pushback from kind of the complexity and how it works, and not as many people necessarily really desperately wanting Android Auto or CarPlay in their cars as well. So there are lots of organisations that are very keenly fighting that at the moment to see whether it will become an even playing field or not. But the big point of kind of what I was touching on is more that radio has to have this amazing proposition to go into these conversations, because if it just goes in saying, yeah, it's an FM radio feed and you can show 98.4 on the screen, Spotify will come in and say, we do these videos that animate and we can show playlists